Can we start right now? Okay. So now we are considering about going ahead in Spring Boot. So in this, we need to first understand what is the Spring Boot architecture, which will be like if you consider Spring Boot, the boot means it is a main program. So when it is coming to a main program which controls all the activities of the Spring-based applications. So for that reason, we are going to Spring Boot architecture. In the Spring Boot architecture, we have 4 layers. The first layer is presentation layer. The second layer is business layer. The third layer is persistence layer. The fourth layer is database layer. If you consider presentation layer, in the presentation layer, you should be having an authentication and JSON translation. That is, whatever the user uses to use login information, that will be used for authentication. After that, you get in, that will be having a business logic. The business logic needs to be validated with the yeah. Okay. Hello. Hello. Okay. So when we consider, okay, when we consider the different layers which are involved in the Spring Boot, it will be a presentation layer, it will be a business layer, persistence layer, database layer. So in that persistence layer, we have an authentication module. By using that, we need to do the user ID, password, and get in with the JSON translation, etc. Then we have a business layer where we will be having a business logic, validation, authorization. Then we have a persistence layer where we need to code on the storage logic. Then we have a database layer which will be used for doing the actual database informations. So this is how presentation layer is there. Presentation layer has the HTTP requests and JSON results. Then business layer will be holding authorization and the validation. Persistence layer has the storage logic. Database layer will be having the CRUD operations, which will be having create, retrieve, update, delete. So when you consider this Spring Boot flow of architecture, in that the client, which is the end user who sends HTTP requests, the HTTP request goes to controller, the controller receives that instructions, then it goes to the service layer, it calls on different services, this services goes to CRUD services, where it can access the database information and get the results. Then it will be going to model, get your JPA informations by this. Model will hold the presentation layer also. So this is the whole flow of Spring Boot flow architecture. Now, when we go for this one, when you wanted to know, okay, how I will be getting into different projects in Spring Boot, what way I will be getting different Spring Boot projects. If you go to HTTP Spring IO guides, in this different projects with this are listed. So you should select which projects you needed. So if I go to spring.io, in that, if I am checking these projects, I should be going to projects.spring.io / I select Spring Boot. Then by that means I come into this place. So here what we are doing, it is a sub-project of Spring Framework. What is a Spring Framework, or what is Spring Boot involved in this? Now if Spring Framework contains different elements, Spring Boot is like this. It is one of the component which is in Spring Framework. Now when you consider this Spring Framework, which has been using the different way of operations, which will be an application framework, which will use a model, view, controller, which will have inversion of control containers. So in that ways, how we had been developing this flow, it is having a history of authors, which will be like J2EE libraries and Spring Boot at Automagic without XML, that is also there. So when you are considering Spring tutorials with the Spring Framework history, which has different kinds of development network, the initial thingy which had been started from 2002, which is from Johnson, then it had been kept on developed, and we are getting the Spring Boot in 2014. Now when you consider Spring, Spring is a resort print terms renewal, that is a cold winter of ugly EJB springs. From that one we are going to Spring. Why we need to do the Spring? Because it has different kinds of elements inside there. So because it has different kinds of elements inside there, we are taking Spring as the framework. In the Spring Framework, we have the Spring Boot, which is a major resource which can be used for doing the boot operations. Have you got the information up to this? Okay, so what we had learned up to now is, okay, if there is a Spring Boot will have a main project. So if that is a main project, by using that you can do different kinds of controller and split the control to different locations and do the operations. It had 4 layers: the presentation layer, then there is a persistence layer, then there is a business layer, then there is a database layer, and all that combinedly give you a Spring Boot framework. Now Spring Boot had been instantiated by 2014. Now whenever you wanted to go to Spring Boot Spring IO guides, in that one you can able to have different kinds of projects. You can just click on the necessary resources, you can get to projects there, you can just download it and start it, which will be serving you the initial phase. Otherwise you can go to http://spring.io. If you do that, you can just give the group ID, then artifact name, then this will be the artifact which will be the jar file name. Then you can put what is the dependency files which needs to be added. Then if you wanted to generate a Maven project, you just use OK. Generate a Maven project with the Spring Boot. What is the version? So by using this location start.spring.io, I can able to generate a Maven project. So I will be saying generate a Maven project with the Spring Boot, with which will be this version. Then I put the corresponding package name. Then I will be giving this one will be my var file or jar file needs to be created. Then I will be putting different dependencies. I use generate project. Once I do the generate project, I got the project. Then I will be going and opening that project into Eclipse. Then I do the mvn clean compile. If I do clean compile, then that whole flow will be compiled and I get some results. Now, when we are going through this Spring Boot application, whenever you see the application is like you had put something demo. So you got the application name with demo application. This demo application will have at Spring Boot application. At the Spring Boot application means I have a main. From this main, there is a Jetty server, there is a Tomcat server. These two are embedded in this code. And so, when I say Spring application.run, please take this application and run above the Tomcat, run above the Jetty server 8080. That's what this means. After this, what we do? Once this is running, you can able to see which location the local host had been started. Then if the local host had been started, you just run that one and then you can able to go and check how it is worked. So for doing this flow, you have to take, okay, if this is a demo application, it might have a Spring Boot application once it is generated. Then the next step, okay, once you run this flow, it needs to be having a demo application with this location generated. Then you can see, okay, there is a different kinds of annotations are involved. Then you see there is a unit test also which had been created with that flow, which will be having, okay, demo application tests with the context loads and at run with Spring Runner. So Spring Boot test will be run with these kind of annotations. Then after this, after you get this, you put okay Java -jar and you can able to put what is the jar file which you had created. So now if this is going to be demo with this kind of snapshot, if you had got this, you just need to run Java -jar and target/demo of this project. So if you had run it, you can see what is the version it is running, how it is running, what is the contents it is getting generated. So this is how we should run the different projects. So now in this flow, what first you need to do is you need to go to this Spring framework. Here this is Spring IO guides, which has a subset which will be Spring Boot. So in the Spring Boot, he is giving a guidelines, download this project and then keep going ahead, and you have a home file. Then in the home file, he is giving the explanation of how it needs to be executed. Then there is a component scan, which will do the component scan of different libraries which are involved. Then for running it, you should use mv&w Spring Boot :run. If you had done this instruction, the mvn will be building that application, then it will do the run operation. Once that had been run, you can able to run the curl code by using this curl localhost 8080, or you load that with localhost :8080. You should be able to go to that corresponding website and you can able to check what is running and how you are getting the results of this. So in this phase, what I say, okay, I am giving you a Spring Boot starter web. By mentioning this, I am saying, okay, my output should be having the index.html. By using this index.html, I get a local host. By using this local host, I will be having localhost :8080/index.html. Then it will be having an intro and a link which had been shared. So by that means what we are doing here, okay, we need to generate a project, then that project needs to be taken